single hug from a stranger changes a little girl's life and unravels a hidden family secret that even a billionaire couldn't see coming. The morning sun had just begun to rise above the tall glass towers of the city, painting the streets in golden light. Expensive cars hummed along the avenue, drivers rushing to begin their busy day. Among them sat a man in the back of a sleek black limousine, a man whose name alone could make newspapers spin stories. He was a billionaire, known for his sharp business mind, his control over industries, and the way he could command a room without raising his voice. Yet, on this particular morning, none of those things seemed to matter. He wasn't thinking about stocks, companies, or meetings. He was thinking about the small hand resting in his, belonging to his 7-year-old daughter. She sat quietly beside him. Dressed neatly in a pale blue dress her father's assistant had laid out for her. Her shoes shined, her hair was tied into a perfect ponytail, but her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a child carrying a sadness far too heavy for someone her age. She stared out the window, watching the world blur past, and not once did she smile. Her father noticed. He always noticed, though he often felt powerless to fix it. It had been months since her mother had passed away. Months of lonely nights, unspoken grief, and a silence that hung in their mansion like a heavy blanket. The little girl had grown quieter and quieter, speaking only when she needed to, eating less, laughing rarely. For a man who had built empires, it was humbling to realize he could not build happiness back into his daughter's heart. That morning, instead of heading straight to his office, he told the driver to take them to a small cafe tucked in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't one of the glittering 5-star hotels he usually visited. This was different. A modest cafe with warm brick walls, wooden tables, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting out onto the street. He wanted something more human, more real. Perhaps he thought it might cheer his daughter to be somewhere cozy, somewhere that didn't echo with wealth, but with life. They stepped inside together. The billionaire, despite being dressed in a tailored suit worth more than most people's yearly income, seemed almost out of place among the ordinary customers. But it didn't matter. His attention was only on his daughter, who walked beside him, was clutching his hand but still wearing that same heavy expression. The cafe wasn't tea-crowded yet. A few people sat with newspapers, some tapped on laptops, and a couple of students laughed quietly in a corner. Behind the counter, a young waitress hurried from table to table, balancing trays with practiced ease. She was not remarkable in the way movie stars or fashion models were. But there was something gentle about her face, something kind in the way she leaned down to listen to each customer. When she approached their table, she greeted them with a smile that was both warm and natural. "Good morning," she said softly, her eyes briefly meeting the little girl's before looking to the father. "Can I get you something to start with? Maybe hot chocolate for the young lady?" The billionaire opened his mouth to order, but his daughter surprised him by whispering, "Yes, please." It was the first word she had spoken since they'd left the house. The waitress nodded and jotted it down quickly, adding a small wink at the girl that made her cheeks lift in the faintest hint of a smile. The father ordered his usual, black coffee and some breakfast. But he hardly noticed the words coming out of his mouth. His mind was still on that tiny reaction from his daughter. A flicker of light, small but real. When the waitress returned with their drinks, she placed the hot chocolate in front of the little girl, complete with a swirl of cream and a sprinkle of chocolate flakes on top. "There you go," she said warmly. "Extra chocolate, just the way I like it." The girl stared at the cup, then at the waitress, and for a moment her father thought she might actually smile again. Instead, she asked, in a soft, trembling voice, "Can you be my mommy for a minute?" The words froze time. The clinking of cups, the chatter of customers, even the steady hum of the coffee machine seemed to disappear. The billionaire's hand tightened around his cup, his chest tightening at the sound of those innocent words. He wanted to stop her, to explain that people couldn't just replace her mother, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked at the waitress instead, waiting for her reaction. The young woman blinked, clearly startled. But she didn't laugh, didn't brush it off, didn't correct the child. Slowly, carefully, she bent down to the girl's level, her eyes softening. "Of course," she whispered, opening her arms. The little girl slid off her chair and stepped into the embrace, clinging tightly to the waitress's waist. Her small arms wrapped around with surprising strength as though she was afraid to let go. The waitress held her gently, stroking her back in a way that seemed almost instinctive, as if she had known her all her life. The billionaire sat frozen in his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen his daughter hug family members before, polite hugs at gatherings, short and distant. But this was different. His daughter was melting into this stranger's arms as she had finally found something she had been desperately searching for. The cafe grew quiet. A few customers lowered their cups, watching the scene with softened eyes. One older woman dabbed at her cheek with a napkin. Even the barista behind the counter paused to take in the moment. There was something raw, something undeniably touching about a child asking for a mother and finding comfort in someone who wasn't bound by blood or name. The embrace lasted longer than anyone expected. The waitress didn't pull away. She simply let the girl hold on for as long as she needed, whispering gentle words that no one else could hear. The little girl's shoulders began to relax. Her breathing steadied, and when she finally looked up, her face held the first genuine smile her father had seen in months. For a man who had everything money could buy, it was a moment that money could never create. He sat there, stunned, unable to move, his carefully built world of wealth and control shaken by the sight of his daughter, clinging to a stranger as if she belonged there. When the girl returned to her seat, still holding the waitress's hand, the father finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said, his tone low, almost rough with emotion. The waitress only gave him a small nod, her eyes lingering on the girl with an expression that seemed deeper than simple kindness. The billionaire lifted his coffee cup, as though he barely tasted the drink. His thoughts swirled, his chest heavy with questions he didn't dare speak yet. Who was this young woman? Why had his daughter connected with her so strongly? And why did a simple hug from a stranger feel like it had changed everything? The morning went on, customers came and went, but for him, time felt suspended. He kept replaying that moment, the hug, the smile on his daughter's face, and the warmth in the waitress's eyes. It was just breakfast in a small cafe, but he knew something had shifted, something he couldn't quite explain, and though he didn't know it yet. That single moment was the beginning of a story that would unravel secrets, stir old memories, and change his life in ways even a billionaire could never predict. The little girl's fingers still clung lightly to the waitress's hand even after she had settled back into her chair. Her father noticed the way she kept looking up at the young woman, as if she didn't want her to leave. It was strange to see his daughter so open, so eager, after so many weeks of sadness. Something about the hug had broken through her silence, and the billionaire could not shake the thought that this stranger had done in minutes what he had been unable to do in months. The waitress, for her part, seemed equally affected. She stayed by their table longer than most servers usually would, crouching slightly so she could keep her eyes level with the child's. She asked her gentle questions about school, about her favorite books, even about her favorite flavor of ice cream. The little girl, who had barely spoken at home, responded softly but without hesitation, as if the waitress had unlocked a hidden door inside her. Each word made the father's chest tighten, with both relief and confusion. When the young woman finally stood to serve another customer, the little girl's face clouded again. She watched her intently across the cafe, her small chin propped on her hands. "She's nice," she whispered. Her father nodded, though he felt an odd discomfort he couldn't name. Nice didn't begin to describe it. There was something deeper happening and he didn't understand it. He tried to focus on his coffee, but his thoughts kept circling back to the hug, to the look on his daughter's face, and to the warmth in the waitress's voice. When their food arrived, the waitress placed the plate gently in front of the girl. "Eat a little," she said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from the child's forehead. The girl smiled shyly and picked up her fork, something she had been refusing to do at home. Watching her take bite after bite, her father felt an ache inside his chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the sting of realizing that this stranger could reach his daughter in a way he could not. For the rest of the meal, the little girl kept glancing at the waitress, her eyes following her around the room. Every time she caught the woman's gaze, her face lit up in a way that made the billionaire's throat tighten. He remembered how she used to look at her mother, that way like the sun had entered the room. That memory made it harder to breathe. When they finished eating, the girl surprised her father again. Instead of letting him handle the bill, she tugged at the waitress's apron gently. "Thank you," she said in her tiny, serious voice. Then, without asking, she wrapped her arms around the waitress again. This time, it was quicker. A child's way of saying goodbye, but it carried the same weight. The billionaire stood awkwardly watching the exchange. He wasn't used to these small human moments, the kind that couldn't be calculated or bought. He felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting, though he didn't know why. As they left the cafe and stepped back into the sleek limousine, he looked down at his daughter. She was humming quietly, her face brighter than it had been in weeks. He should have been relieved, but instead he was unsettled. That night, long after he tucked her into bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the waitress. He remembered the way she had looked at his daughter, the way her arms had fit so naturally around her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't politeness. It was something else, something harder to define. He sat in his vast, quiet study, staring at the city lights outside the window. He wondered why that moment bothered him so much. The next morning, he tried to dismiss it. He had a busy schedule, meetings stacked back to back, investors waiting on his decisions. Yet, when breakfast time came, his daughter asked, "Can we go back to the cafe?" He hesitated. He knew it wasn't wise to indulge sudden attachments, especially to strangers. But when he saw the hopeful look in her eyes, he couldn't refuse. So once again, he told the driver to head to the small cafe instead of their usual breakfast spot. The girl rushed ahead the moment they walked through the door. She spotted the waitress immediately and ran straight to her, wrapping her arms around her waist as if greeting an old friend. The waitress laughed softly and knelt to return the hug, clearly surprised but not unwilling. Watching the scene, the billionaire felt an odd mix of emotions. Part of him was touched, but another part was uneasy. Why did his daughter trust this woman so quickly? Why did it feel so natural for her, when she had kept herself closed off from everyone else? They took the same table, and once again, the waitress lingered longer than necessary. She spoke with the girl like she had known her for years, remembering details from the day before and asking follow-up questions as if she truly cared. The little girl giggled, the sound ringing through the cafe, drawing smiles from other customers. It was a sound her father hadn't heard in what felt like forever. It made his heart ache with both joy and confusion. The billionaire found himself watching the waitress closely now. There was something about her manner. The way she bent slightly when speaking to the girl. The way she used her hands when she talked. It reminded him of someone. At first, he dismissed the thought as his imagination. But as the morning went on, the feeling grew stronger. Certain phrases she used, even the tilt of her smile, sent echoes of memory through his mind. He thought of his late wife's, the way she used to speak to their daughter. The little gestures only a mother would know. It was absurd, he told himself. The waitress was a stranger, but the similarities gnawed at him. As the meal ended, the girl clung to the waitress again, reluctant to leave. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she asked her father on the ride home. He didn't answer right away. His mind was too crowded with questions. Later, as he sat alone in his study once more, he couldn't shake the unease. His empire had been built on facts, numbers, and control. Yet here he was, unsettled by something as simple as a hug. He replayed the waitress's smile in his mind, the look in her eyes, and the way his daughter seemed to come alive around her. He didn't believe in coincidences, not in business, and not in life. Something about this woman was stirring memories he thought he had locked away, and though he couldn't explain it yet, he felt certain that this was only the beginning. The billionaire told himself he was far too busy to waste his time thinking about a cafe waitress. He had companies to run, calls waiting for him, and meetings with people who had flown across the world just to hear his decisions. Yet despite all of that, his mind kept drifting back to the same image, his little girl with her arms wrapped tightly around the young woman, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in months. It was as though the hug had stitched something together inside her. That thought would not leave him alone. The next morning, he tried to focus on work. He sat at the long table in his office, surrounded by men in suits presenting graphs and numbers. Their voices blurred in the background as his thoughts wandered. His phone buzzed with a reminder from his assistant, but his eyes had already drifted toward the photo frame on his desk. It was a picture of his late wife holding their daughter when she was just a baby. The mother's smile in that photo was full of warmth, the same warmth he had noticed in the waitress's eyes. That was when he realized he couldn't ignore it anymore. By the third morning, his daughter didn't even ask if they were going to the cafe. She simply dressed herself and came. Downstairs with an energy he hadn't seen in months. Her father didn't stop her. He gave the driver the address, and once again, the limousine pulled up in front of the small cafe the moment they stepped inside. The girl spotted the waitress and ran straight to her, arms outstretched. The young woman laughed in surprise, but knelt down quickly to return the hug. "Good morning, sunshine," she said, as though she had been waiting just for her. The little girl giggled, and the billionaire felt something tighten inside his chest. They sat at their usual table. The waitress brought over hot chocolate with extra cream before they even ordered, remembering exactly what the girl liked. The billionaire noticed how his daughter's face lit up, as if she had been reunited with someone she trusted deeply. It was not just friendliness, it was something more powerful. It's almost unexplainable. The father watched closely, noticing details he hadn't before. The way the waitress brushed the girl's hair back behind her ear, the way she bent her head slightly to listen, the gentle tone she used. These were the same small gestures his wife used to make, the little signs of love that seemed to come naturally to her. His daughter leaned into them as though she had been waiting for it all this time. For a man who prided himself on control, he hated that he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. His daughter was not a child who opened up to strangers. In fact, since her mother's death, she barely opened up to anyone at all. Yet here she was, laughing and talking freely with this young woman she had met only days ago. When the waitress walked away to serve another table, the billionaire leaned forward. "Why do you like her so much?" he asked gently. His daughter sipped her hot chocolate and gave him an innocent shrug. "She feels like mommy," she said. The words made him stiffen. He didn't know how to respond. It was one thing to notice similarities himself, but for his daughter to sense it, too, there was something uncanny about that. He didn't press her further, afraid of upsetting her. But the thought gnawed at him all day. That afternoon, after dropping his daughter off with her tutor, he made a decision. He would learn more about the waitress. Not because he distrusted her, but because something about this connection felt too strange to be coincidence. He called one of his trusted men from his security team and asked for a discreet background check. He gave them only a name and the cafe's address, instructing them to handle it quietly. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed every detail: the waitress's smile, her words, the way his daughter clung to her. He remembered his wife's laugh, the little habits she had, and the fact that his daughter had picked up on the resemblance so quickly. It made no sense, yet it felt too real to dismiss. The next morning, he returned to the cafe once again. This time, he didn't just watch his daughter interact with the waitress. He watched the waitress herself. He noticed how she handled customers with patience, how she carried herself with quiet dignity even when the cafe grew busy. He noticed her hands trembling slightly when she thought no one was looking, as though she carried a weight of her own. He struck up small conversations with her while his daughter happily ate breakfast. He asked where she had grown up, what she had studied, little things that might seem casual but were carefully chosen questions. To his surprise, her answers brushed against places and names that rang faint bells in his memory. She mentioned having once lived in a town connected to his wife's childhood, a place his daughter's mother had rarely spoken of but never completely forgotten. The coincidence unsettled him more than he expected. He sat back in his chair, his mind spinning as he sipped his coffee. He remembered stories his wife had told him, fragmented memories of her family, mentions of people she hadn't seen in years. Could it be connected? Or was he simply searching for meaning where there was none? Across the table, his daughter was laughing again, chocolate on her lips as the waitress gently wiped it away with a napkin. The sight was both heartwarming and haunting. It was like watching a memory come alive, something he had thought he would never see again. After breakfast, As they prepared to leave, the girl clung once more to the waitress's hand. "Can you come with us?" she asked innocently. The waitress laughed softly, though her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I can't, sweetie. I have to work here. But I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" The girl nodded reluctantly, letting go only when her father guided her away. But the billionaire didn't miss the look that passed across the young woman's face. It wasn't just kindness. There was something else there, something deeper, like recognition. That night, the background report arrived on his desk. He stared at the file for a long moment before opening it, his heart beating heavier than it should. Inside were details about the waitress's life where she had lived, the job she had taken, and the struggles she had endured. At first, it seemed ordinary. But then, halfway down the page, his eyes froze on a single line. A family connection. A name he recognized. It was connected to his wife. He set the file down slowly, his hands trembling in a way they never did during billion-dollar negotiations. The waitress wasn't just a stranger. She was tied to his wife's past. And suddenly, all the coincidences no longer felt like coincidences at all. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. His daughter had sensed it before anyone else. She had clung to the waitress because, deep down, she had felt the truth before he even uncovered it. And though he didn't yet know the full story, he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. The billionaire sat in his study with the background file lying open in front of him. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. But inside his head, there was noise thoughts crashing against each other, questions he didn't know how to answer. He read the report again, slowly, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. The waitress's name was connected to his late wife's family. Not directly, but enough that it couldn't be ignored. She wasn't just some stranger his daughter had taken a liking to. She was part of a story that had started long before his daughter was even born. His hands tightened on the papers as he remembered, things his wife had told him years ago. She hadn't spoken much about her family, only bits and pieces. She had mentioned a broken home, arguments, separations that had left wounds too deep to mend. She had said there were people in her past she had lost contact with, people she didn't want to discuss. At the time, he hadn't pressed her. He had thought it best to let her keep her peace. Now he wondered if he should have asked more questions. The next morning, he went to the cafe again. This time he didn't go just as a father taking his daughter out for breakfast. He went as a man with a secret he needed to uncover. His daughter skipped happily inside, running straight to the waitress like she always did. The young woman smiled and knelt down, hugging her as if she had been waiting all night for this moment. The sight made the billionaire's chest tighten. But he forced himself to stay calm. He watched carefully as the girl chatted with the waitress, laughing over something silly. The bond between them seemed stronger every day, like invisible threads pulling them closer. He could see it in his daughter's eyes, trust, love, comfort. And he could see something in the waitress's eyes too, though she tried to hide it. It was the look of someone who felt a connection, but didn't know how to explain it. When the waitress stepped away to take another order, he finally leaned toward his daughter. "Do you really like her this much?" he asked softly. The little girl nodded, sipping her hot chocolate. "She makes me feel safe," she said. Then, with a seriousness that startled him, she added, "She feels like she's supposed to be here." Those words echoed in his mind long after they left the cafe. Later that afternoon, he asked his security team to dig deeper. The first report had given him enough to know there was a link, but not the full story. He wanted details. He wanted answers. The next day, a thicker file was placed on his desk. He read it late into the night, his heart growing heavier with each page. The truth was shocking. The waitress was his late wife's half-sister. They had been separated when they were young, caught in the middle of a family torn apart by betrayal and anger. His wife's mother had remarried, and the family had split, each side raising children apart from one another. Over the years, contact had been lost completely. His wife had rarely spoken of it, perhaps too hurt or too proud to revisit that part of her past. And now, here was her sister. working as a waitress in a small cafe, completely unaware that the little girl who clung to her every morning was her own niece. The billionaire sat back in his chair, stunned. It felt surreal, like something out of a story rather than real life. But it explained everything: the instant bond, the familiarity, the way his daughter had sensed something no one else could. Children had instincts adults often ignored, and his daughter had felt family in that embrace before anyone knew the truth. For several days he debated what to do. Should he confront her? Should he tell her the truth? Should he protect his daughter from knowing, or should he embrace this strange twist of fate? He found himself pacing his office at night, wrestling with questions he had never thought he would face. Finally, one morning, he decided he couldn't keep silent any longer. He brought his daughter to the cafe as usual, but this time, after they finished breakfast. He asked the waitress if she could spare a moment to talk. She looked surprised but agreed, wiping her hands on her apron as she led them to a quiet corner. The billionaire's daughter stayed close, holding her father's hand. The waitress glanced between them, sensing something serious. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. He studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "I need to ask you something personal," he said carefully. "Do you know much about your family history?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her brow furrowed, and she shifted uncomfortably. "Why?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Because," he said slowly, "I think you may have been connected to someone very important in my life." Her hands trembled as she crossed her arms, clearly unsure what he meant. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then finally said the words, "My wife, the mother of my daughter. She passed away. But I believe she was your sister." The waitress's eyes widened, shock flashing across her face. She stared at him as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "That's not possible," she whispered, but he explained further, mentioning names, places, and fragments of family history that matched the details from the report. With every word, the young woman's expression shifted from disbelief to confusion, then to trembling recognition. Tears welled in her eyes as she covered her mouth with her hand. I had a sister," she finally said in a broken voice. "But we lost touch when we were kids. My mother never talked about it. I didn't even know where she went." Her voice cracked. "You're saying she was here? She grew up? She had a daughter?" The billionaire nodded. His daughter, sensing the heaviness in the air, squeezed the waitress's hand gently. The young woman looked down at the girl, her tears spilling over. "You're her daughter," she whispered. The little girl tilted her head, not fully understanding, but smiling shyly, as if something inside her already knew. The waitress broke down then. Sitting at the edge of a chair and crying softly, she admitted she had always felt like something was missing in her life, that she had wondered about her sister but had no way of finding her. She had no idea she had a niece living so close. The billionaire watched the scene silently, torn between sorrow and relief. He thought of his wife, how she had never spoken much of her family, how she had carried pain he couldn't fix. If only she were alive now to see her daughter finding comfort in the arms of the very sister she had lost. The waitress wiped her tears, looking both overwhelmed and filled with awe. "I didn't know why your daughter felt so familiar," she whispered. "But the moment she hugged me, it felt like something I had been waiting for my whole life." The billionaire's heart ached as he listened. He had spent so long building walls of wealth and control around himself, but here, in the middle of a small cafe, those walls were crumbling. Fate had brought them together in the most unexpected way, and there was no denying the truth anymore. When they left the cafe that day, the billionaire held his daughter's hand more tightly than ever. The waitress stood at the doorway watching them go, her eyes filled with tears and something new hope. He knew then that his life had taken a turn he could never have predicted. And though he didn't yet know what it meant for their future, one thing was certain. The past had found its way back into their lives, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were unlike anything the billionaire had expected. The cafe, once just a quiet place for breakfast, had become a kind of bridge between the past and the present. Every morning, his daughter ran ahead to greet her newfound aunt, and every morning, the young woman hugged her tightly, as though trying to make up for the years they had lost. The billionaire watched quietly from a distance at first, still unsure how to act in this strange new dynamic. He had built a life where control was everything, but here, he had no control at all, and he realized he didn't want it. His daughter's laughter filled the cafe, ringing like music through the wooden walls. The little girl had become more alive than she had been in months. She talked freely, she smiled constantly, and she seemed lighter in spirit, as if a shadow that had been hanging over her had finally lifted. The billionaire could hardly recognize the small, happy girl who clung to her aunt's hand as if she had been waiting for her all along, the waitress. For her part, was learning quickly how to be part of their lives. She didn't rush, she didn't try to take the place of anyone, but she was patient, gentle, and careful. She shared stories of her childhood, stories she had never thought to tell anyone, and she listened intently as the billionaire spoke about his wife, about the family they had lost, about the life they had tried to build together. With each conversation, the walls between them fell away. The billionaire found himself talking more openly than he ever had with anyone. He admitted fears he had carried since his wife passed, fears that he was failing his daughter, fears that he might never be able to fill the emptiness she felt. The young woman never judged. She simply listened, and her presence was calming in a way he didn't fully understand. She had her own wounds, her own experiences of loss, yet somehow, she made room for theirs without complaint. One morning, as the three of them sat at their usual table, the little girl looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said softly, "can Auntie come live with us?" The billionaire paused. He hadn't expected that question. He had considered asking her to spend more time with them, perhaps even weekends together, but living together was a whole different step. He looked at the young woman, watching her expression carefully. She seemed startled at first, then hesitant, and finally, she shook her head slightly. "I can't just yet," she said quietly. "I have work here, but I promise I'll see you every day I can." His daughter pouted slightly, but nodded, accepting the promise. The billionaire, however, felt a surge of hope. Even this small promise meant something. It was the start of something real, something lasting. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. The billionaire noticed how naturally the young woman interacted with his daughter, reading to her, teaching her small games, and comforting her during moments of sadness. He saw his daughter relax in ways she never had before, curling up beside her aunt during story time, holding her hand tightly when she felt unsure. The trust and love between them grew, and the billionaire realized that his daughter had found something precious, a family she didn't have to question, a connection she didn't have to earn. The young woman, too, seemed to transform. She became more confident, more assured, as though having this connection finally filled a gap she had carried for years. She would tell him stories of her own childhood, of memories of a sister she barely knew, of the loneliness that had haunted her. And the billionaire listened, offering comfort, support, and sometimes simply a presence without words. They had become a team, a family in the making, each one healing through the presence of the others. One afternoon, the billionaire found himself alone with the waitress in the quiet corner of the cafe. She looked nervous, unsure what to say, and he felt compelled to break the silence. "You've changed everything for her," he said gently. "I don't know if I could have done it alone." She looked down, fidgeting with her hands. "I didn't know I could do anything," she admitted softly. "But when I saw her hug me the first time, I felt something I've never felt before. It's like I finally understand part of my family I never knew." He nodded. "It's strange how life works sometimes. We lose people. We think the connections are gone forever. But then, in the smallest moments, they find us again." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a mutual understanding. A recognition that their lives were intertwined now in ways they could not have anticipated. He realized that the past was no longer just a memory. It was part of the present, and together, they could shape the future. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The little girl's laughter became a constant in the billionaire's life. The young woman became a fixture in their routine. And slowly, she began to feel at home in the mansion, visiting not just for breakfast, but for afternoons, dinners, and small family moments that once seemed impossible. The billionaire watched her interact with his daughter, guiding, teaching, comforting, and he felt a gratitude that he could not put into words. One evening, after a particularly long day, the billionaire found himself sitting in his study, his daughter asleep in her room. The young woman had stayed late that night to help her finish a school project. He realized then how much their lives had shifted in such a short time. From strangers to acquaintances to family life had moved in a way he could never have planned. And yet, for the first time in months, he felt complete. He thought of his wife, of the love they had shared, of the family they had lost. And he knew that, in some small, miraculous way, a part of her lived on in this connection, through her sister, through their daughter, and through the bond they had formed together. It was a new kind of happiness, one that could not be bought, controlled, or planned. It was real, fragile, and precious. The following morning, as they all walked into the cafe together, the billionaire held his daughter's hand, and she held her aunt's. The waitress looked at them with a mixture of awe and gratitude. It was a simple moment, ordinary in appearance, but extraordinary in meaning. They were no longer strangers. They were family. The cafe, once just a place for breakfast, had become a place of reunion, healing, and new beginnings. And as the billionaire watched his daughter laugh and play, holding the woman who had become her aunt, he realized that life had a way of surprising even the most powerful, even the most cautious. Love, connection, and family could appear in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes, all it took was a hug to start a lifetime of change. In that moment, the billionaire understood that everything had shifted. The past had come back to them in the most unexpected way, and the future was now filled with possibilities he had never imagined. The little girl had found her aunt. The aunt had found her family. And the billionaire had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found love, trust, and hope for a future filled with the laughter and warmth of the family he had thought he had lost forever. And as they left the cafe together that day, walking hand in hand into the bright morning sun, it was clear that their lives would never be the same again.